Hi, hello! On my very long list of videos that I had promised you all for a while was a video discussing my favorite one and done eyeshadows. And I had to think really hard about my favorite one and done eyeshadows because I don't really do one and dones all that often, so I had to really search the archives to not miss anything. I think I've got everything covered here. Most of these are going to be honestly neutral eyeshadows as expected. Some of these are going to have a little bit more color, but before we get into swatching my favorite one and done eyeshadows, I feel like there are a couple of introductory words to be said here. First of all, stating the obvious here, but literally any eyeshadow that your little heart desires, be it a matte or a metallic or a glitter, can be a one and done if you like it, if it works for you, which is why I wanted to specifically state what I consider to be the type of one and done eyeshadows that work for me. I consider myself to be relatively picky when it comes to one and done eyeshadows because I've really struggled in the past putting eyeshadows on my lids, blending them out and thinking, for some reason this looks weird. I know it's supposed to work really well, but I just don't like it. There's something that is not quite right. Oh, and something else that I would like to add just as a little, side note. When I say one and done eyeshadow, I really don't mean that I'm only wearing that one eyeshadow, because I will wear one eyeshadow on my eyelids, but I will always have an inner corner highlight. So technically it's a two and done eyeshadow, but you know what I mean. The idea is that you just put like one eyeshadow all over your lids, crease, you blend it out, lower lash line, the whole spiel, and then yeah, if you don't want an inner corner highlight, you can totally skip the inner corner highlight, but I always like to have an inner corner highlight, especially also because of the shape of my eyes. And here we can circle right back to why I am so picky about my one and done eyeshadows, and I think that's mostly because of my eye shape. So I have relatively small eyes that don't have that beautifully natural elongated shape to them. So when I do my makeup, I like to create that effect by playing with shade and light. So I always like to have something that is a little bit deeper in my outer corner and something a little bit lighter on my lids to sort of imitate that elongated almond shape eye that I don't naturally have. In addition, I have a lot of space between my moving lid and my brow bone, which makes a lot of eyeshadows look extremely strange on me if I put them as one and dones. I think specific examples of that would be pastel eyeshadows. But generally speaking, the reason I'm picky about my one and done eyeshadows is that they need to have specific qualities to them, and like one main specific quality to them in order to work with my eye shape. And that quality is a bit of complexity in the depth of the base tone and the metallic, glittery or whatever overlay it is. So if I put just a straight up metallic one color all over my lids, I always feel like it looks really strange. So I'm always looking for eyeshadows that have at least a hint of a difference in that depth. So you have a little bit of that darker, smokier base color, and the overlay is a lighter, brighter, metallic or glittery finish. So that creates the kind of effect that imitates a little bit that shade and light. So when I turn my eyes, when I'm wearing an eyeshadow like this, you will see a little bit of depth being created in my outer corner, whereas there is a lot of light coming from my eyelid area. And that is basically my most important criterion for whether I will end up liking something as a one and done or not. And there are many eyeshadows in my collection that I have not even tried wearing as one and done eyeshadows, and they probably would work as one and dones. I just have never tried them. Now I've got quite a few different brands. Obviously Pat McGrath Labs will be the highest represented brand, but I've got a couple of other brands that I would like to talk about. So I think I'm going to start off with the non-Pat McGrath favorite one and dones, and then we're going to move on into the Pat McGrath Labs territory. So starting off with some of the obvious choices, which are going to be pot eyeshadows. And I have three here to show you. I have two pot eyeshadows from Auric, which is the brand created by Sam Ravendal. I have the shades Ego and Defiance. So the shade Defiance is like the bronzier brownie type of shade. If I can ever get that lid off, I will show it to you. So this is the shade of the cream, and then obviously our top you have the little glittery topper. If I can think of videos where I have worn these so that you can see either them being demonstrated or them being worn, I will leave them up in the cards. And I'm pretty sure that I have demoed the shade Defiance on my channel before. But Defiance is a beautiful, you know, like I said, bronzy brown. At least that's the creamy part of the eyeshadow, which looks like this. It is actually similar to what I'm wearing on my lids right now, but I feel like it is just a little bit more red tone based compared to the shade that I'm wearing today. Let me put a little bit of the topper so that you can see. The topper is actually really beautiful and quite sparkly and has a gorgeous like wet finish effect to it. The reason I don't wear these very often is the obvious. If I'm going for a one and done eyeshadow look, usually I am in a hurry, so I don't have that much time to fuck around with things. And these pots, as much as, you know, I think they're beautiful and luxurious, you know, you have to open the pot, and I still have the plastic protector here because I don't want my eyeshadows to dry out, and they're not the easiest to remove. I'm still struggling to remove the one from Ego here. Oh my gosh, this is not coming off. So, as much as I love them, I need to be not only in the mood for wearing a single eyeshadow, but also have the time to fuck around with it. These are beautiful quality. Do I recommend that you go out of your way to get them? I don't know. I think you can achieve similar effects with other eyeshadows that are much more easily available on the market, because these being offered by Auric means that you can only get them from Auric's website. And there are significant costs included here. If you live in Europe, you have to pay the 21% VAT. You also have to pay for shipping. So if you add up the costs, these single pots end up being the price of, I don't know, one of your kidneys. So in that respect, I don't think they are your best option when it comes to one and done eyeshadows. And also because of the inconvenience of having to go in the cream pot and then having to go into the topper, it just takes a little bit more time. Whereas there are other pot eyeshadows, I'm going to mention one now, which sort of create those like same effects without you having to go into like basically two different eyeshadows. I do enjoy the versatility of this. You can wear only the cream, you can wear only the topper, you can use the topper as your inner corner highlight. They are beautiful. And if I had to recommend one, I would definitely go for Ego, because Ego is a very unique shade. It is like that pewter, silvery, sort of greenish eyeshadow, and it looks beautiful on the lids, and for whatever reason it works really beautifully with brown eyes. I always feel like my eyes look very striking when I wear this eyeshadow. But even though they're beautiful and I love everything about them, I actually don't really wear them as often, unfortunately. Now, a recent favorite in the pot eyeshadow category has to be the lid luster that I got from Victoria Beckham in the shade Mink. Taupey, minky type of shades are some of my favorite type of like browns to wear, because I just find the tones to be so unique. Now, what is excellent about this eyeshadow is precisely what I was talking about before. You put it on and it has that smoky mink taupey base, but then as you blend it out, you see that beautiful sparkle coming through. Here you have kind of the effect that these create, but in just that one pot eyeshadow. In terms of ease of use and blendability, all of these three pot eyeshadows are incredibly easy to use. They blend out like an absolute dream, and I've mentioned this before, but I will say it again. You have to be careful a little bit when you work with Mink. I would definitely recommend grabbing a fluffy natural hair bristle brush and then just going very lightly on your lids, blending out and putting more, you know, depth where you want it and shearing it out more where you want it to be more sheared out, because the texture of this specific formula I find to be quite thick. And if you go in with your these types of brushes, the packing kind of brushes, or you go straight with your fingers, I think you're going to over apply the eyeshadow and you're not going to end up being super happy with the result. So with the Victoria Beckham one, there's definitely a bit of a learning curve of what works best in order to achieve this effect. But once you get there, it looks beautiful on the lid, it is very easy to work with, and it's just a beautiful formula. Again, quite expensive. All of the three favorite pot eyeshadow formulas that I have in my collection are relatively expensive, difficult to get brands. but they are my favorites in my collection and I did have to absolutely mention them. Now, if I'm not mistaken, there are only 2 eyeshadows in here that I'm going to mention that are not from Pat McGrath, and then the rest is all going to be Pat McGrath. The first one I absolutely have to mention is from the Royal G quad from Guerlain. These are the quads that they released last year in the beautiful Baked Gelée formula, and the eyeshadow that I'm talking about is this one here, this gorgeous brown toned red. It is just an absolutely stunning eyeshadow. It looks really beautiful against my brown eyes, and it just, there's something about the depth of the smokiness, the slightly like reddish shift, coppery shift to the metallic overlay, and the formula on this is absolutely divine. It just blends itself out. This is an absolutely gorgeous eyeshadow, and it is by far one of my most favorite one and done eyeshadows because I just really like how it looks against my eyes and the effect that it creates. Oh, I just love it. This eyeshadow is phenomenal. Now, another eyeshadow that I like to wear is actually quite different from the eyeshadows that I showed so far, because it is more of like a light champagne, and it is from the Body Heat quad from Tom Ford. It is in his Wet and Dry formula. I have the limited edition packaging, but Body Heat is just available in his range. It's one of his most re-released quads, I wanna say. And this is probably going to sound really strange to you that I really like this eyeshadow, because I mentioned earlier that I don't really like to wear these type of champagne shades all over my lid because they look really strange. However, and I hope that the swatch is going to demonstrate that a little bit, this eyeshadow has a little bit of depth to it. It is not a straight up metallic champagne. There is a little bit of depth to the base tones of it, which creates a little bit of that like light and shade effect. So when I want to wear just like a bright champagne one and done, I will often go into the Body Heat quad, because this is my favorite like one and done champagne eyeshadow because of that little bit of more depth to the base tone. Let's get into Pat McGrath's realm, and the first eyeshadow I want to talk about is also the one that I'm wearing all over my lids today. I'm not wearing it as a one and done because I added a little bit of Astral Luna Gold and the champagne from the Bronze Seduction palette, because I did a look with that last week. I really liked it and I wanted to replicate it. But if I were to wear this as a one and done eyeshadow, I would still really enjoy it with like a little bit of an inner corner pop, as I mentioned. This is the shade Ultrasuede Brown, which was part of her Ultrasuede Brown kit. So unfortunately, this is going to be really difficult for people to find. I have an alternative, which unfortunately is also limited edition, but I'm going to mention that in a little bit. This eyeshadow is absolutely phenomenal. There is something about the undertone of this that works so beautifully with my specific eye color, and just the way it blends out, how silky smooth it looks on the lids. Just an absolute delight. This is not a very like high shine eyeshadow. There's not going to be a strong metallic overlay, but there is something about the tone that just looks really beautiful against my eye color, I find. There's a little bit of like that green bronzy tone, and I just love this eyeshadow. This was a recommendation from my friend Claudia, and I'm eternally grateful that she has introduced me to this eyeshadow. But at the same time, I feel a little bit sad for all of you who can't get this eyeshadow. Now, if you happened to have grabbed the Divine Droid quad from the Star Wars collection, I think there is an eyeshadow here that I would call the Ultrasuede Brown 2.0, and that is this shade here, which is called Bronze Circuit. Bronze Circuit essentially, I think, has the same base color as the shade Ultrasuede Brown, but it also has the added bonus of that glorious metallic and shiny overlay. If you happen to not be like a hardcore Pat McGrath fan who has collected these kits from the very beginning of the labs, but you happen to have this shade and you were really excited about the prospect of using a similar eyeshadow, then I would definitely recommend trying this one as a one and done, because it would look just as beautiful, if maybe not even more glam, because Ultrasuede Brown, while beautiful, is more of like a satin slightly metallic finish, whereas this one you can see is obviously like a blinding metallic finish, and I absolutely love both of them so much. Now, another eyeshadow that I feel like has somewhat similar tones to Ultrasuede Brown, but is just a little bit more taupe leaning rather than like bronzy brown leaning, is the shade Telepathic Taupe. I have this shade in a single because I never bought the original like mini subliminal mothership, one of the original 6-pan eyeshadows. 6-pan eyeshadow palettes which contained this specific eyeshadow. But if you happen to have that original mini Mothership Subliminal, you're going to have this eyeshadow in your palette in there. I just have it as a single. I bought it because I was very intrigued by the tone of this eyeshadow, and I was not wrong. It is just such an interesting eyeshadow. Again, it has that slightly greenish tone to it. Very similarly to Ultrasuede Brown, it is not an overly metallic eyeshadow. It has more of that like satin, slightly shimmery metallic finish to it. But there is something very interesting about the tone of this eyeshadow, and you can see again there's a little bit of depth coming from that like taupey brown base and that beautiful like goldenish greenish metallic overlay that is just so stunning. I love this eyeshadow. What I love usually doing with this eyeshadow actually is using it together with my little Skin Fetish highlighter trio. And what I will do is I will just use the highlighters to highlight my face, and I will put the golden, you know, duochromy one in my inner corners, and I will very, very lightly dab a few specks of this over top of Telepathic Taupe because it creates a really beautiful effect with those tiny shimmers that come from the highlighter. Let me see if I can show you just a tiny bit. My lighting is quite strong. Yeah, I don't think you're going to see this, but yeah, if you stand in artificial lighting and you put just the tiniest dab of this highlighter, it adds an extra dimension and extra, you know, something to Telepathic Taupe, and I absolutely love using the two together. Alright you guys, I pulled out a lot more eyeshadows because as I was thinking about it sitting here, I realized there were a lot more eyeshadows that I like to use as one and dones. So this quickly exploded into the kind of video that is not going to fit in my pre-work routine, or at least not in one day. So I'm going to come back tomorrow in different attire, different makeup, and we're going to continue swatching that topic. So let's continue our swatch party. I am going to swatch the couple of neutral eyeshadows that are still left here, and then we're going to move into the more like colorful one and done type eyeshadows that I like to use. So the first one is going to be another single that I also have in a palette, and you have seen me talk about this eyeshadow so many times. This is the shade Divine Mink, or as my friend Meg likes to call it, Sacred Weasel, which is I think one of the most interesting minky shades ever. It is not a very glittery shade, so for example if you compare it to the shade from Victoria Beckham, the shade from Victoria Beckham has like that similar, you know, vibe, the minky brown taupe, but it's a bit more sparkly. This is not sparkly, but it has such interesting undertones, especially when you start to blend it out. Just FYI, in case you were not aware of that, if you have your Decadence palette, this shade here, the one in the middle on the bottom row, is Divine Mink. I just happen to have both because I bought the Decadence palette after I had already purchased the single. But I love my single because I can take it along and it's just here in my drawer when I'm not feeling like taking out the whole palette. But let me swatch Divine Mink for you. So what I think is very interesting about Divine Mink is that it's, first of all, more gray toned compared to the shade from Victoria Beckham. And second of all, when you start to blend it out, it almost has like a deep navy blue undertone to it. It is such an interesting and unique shade. It has that silvery taupe metallic overlay and that very interesting taupey blue base to it, and I cannot tell you how unique this eyeshadow is. Now, because of its undertones, obviously it's not going to work for everyone. It is also a relatively deep shade, so you are going to end up with a really smoky eye. I think much more smoky compared to the shade from Victoria Beckham, because the shade from Victoria Beckham still has that glitter wet effect that I think will give more light to your lids. This is going to be deeper and smokier, but it is just so interesting, and you can always pull out, I don't know, one of the Astros from McGrath to dab on in order to give a little bit more light. But even if you were to do just a one and done look with it, it is still beautiful. Okay, since we were talking about the Decadence palette, let me show you another eyeshadow in here that I absolutely love to use as a one and done, and it is the shade here called Inferno. Inferno is one of the absolutely most unique eyeshadows that you have ever come across. Oh, I don't think I cleaned off Divine Mink. So what's interesting about Inferno has that like coppery, bronzy, neutral, metallic overlay but the base of this eyeshadow is very smoky. Do you see when I move my hand here in the light, how if I turn like this, it almost seems to have like a grayish, dark, brownish base to it? And that is what makes this eyeshadow so interesting and so versatile. Not only the metallic sheen on it, but also that depth that comes from the like base color of this eyeshadow. It is such an interesting neutral. It's sadly one of the eyeshadows that I have never really seen re-promoted by Pat, unfortunately, so you can only find it in the Decadence palette, but luckily the Decadence palette is no longer limited edition as it used to be. Now another shade that unfortunately was limited edition I have never seen re-promoted, and it remains one of my most favorite like unique neutrals in my collection, is the shade Metallurgy here from the Metalmorphosis 6 pan from Holidays 2018. Yep, that old, and it still performs beautifully. This is another one of those eyeshadows that tends to lean in onto different tones to it. Like in certain lighting it appears to be like a deeper, smokier brownish shade. In other lighting it also has that taupey, greeny, you know, telepathic taupe kind of tones to it, but it has a very strong metallic sheen, and it is also unique and also gorgeous. I really love this shade, and honestly I hope that at some point she decides to re-promote it, because it is gorgeous and it's a shame that a lot of you will not be able to have this shade. I think these were more or less all the like more neutral type one and done eyeshadows that I wanted to talk about. So now let's chat about the more colorful ones. The first one I want to mention is the shade Corrupt Copper. It is the most beautiful, vibrant coppery orange, and I think it has like a deeper reddish base to it, which is why it looks very dimensional when you put it on your lid as a one and done shade. Again, an eyeshadow that I have in a single and I also have in a palette because it was re-promoted in the Celestial Odyssey palette. So if you have the Celestial Odyssey palette, then you also have Corrupt Copper. It has a beautiful, gorgeous texture to it, so it blends out really easily, and because of that, I don't know whether you'll be able to catch it in the light, that very subtle, it's very subtle. It's not like you're going to see a duochrome shade. Obviously like duochromes and multichromes are going to be the perfect one and does because of that intrinsic duality in the shift. Well, depends on the duochrome of course, but in this case we're not really talking about a straight up duochrome, but we're talking about like a very subtle hint of that like deeper reddish bronzy shade and that very vibrant metallic copper overlay. Beautiful eyeshadow. It looks so gorgeous just as one eyeshadow on your lids. Another one that looks absolutely gorgeous, and especially in the summer, is a shade that I have talked about quite a few times before. This is actually a duochromatic shade. This is the shade Pale Fire, which again I have in a single, and I purchased also the palette that it originally comes from, which is the Levian Rose 6 pan. Again, one of the original 6 pans that were released, but again, I purchased Pale Fire as a single when it was released, and I only purchased the palette that it comes in later. Pale Fire is gorgeous. It is such a stunning shade, especially in like the more summery months. It has that goldenish peachy base with that more magenta pink overlay. Oh, it looks beautiful, dimensional, fresh. Oh, I just love this eyeshadow. I take it with me pretty much everywhere where I travel, especially throughout the spring and summer months, because I haven't really traveled that much, I have to say, in the winter and fall months recently. So I basically take it every time I travel because it is so perfect. I think you can probably tell that I have loved that eyeshadow also from the indentation that it has in the pan. Is anyone surprised that I'm going to talk about a Gigabyte from the Subversive palette? Oh gosh. What an absolutely phenomenal, one-of-a-kind, I have never seen anything like it eyeshadow. This eyeshadow, I adore Gigabyte. If you don't have the Subversive palette, but you happen to have the Bridgerton 2 palette, the Belle of the Ball, the eyeshadow that's in there is very similar to Gigabyte. It's just slightly more vibrant in its like goldenish green tones. This eyeshadow, again, has a deeper smoky base to it. So when I shift my hand in a certain lighting, you will see that like grayish dark base coming through. And then when I turn it towards the light, you see the beautiful, unique, sparkly green golden overlay. Of course, this is one of the most beautiful one and done eyeshadows because when you wear this, people will just stare at you and ask what on earth are you wearing. Another fresh, more like summer duochrome shade that I love to use as a one and done eyeshadow is this one here, VR, what was this called again? This is the shade VR Rose Venus, and VR Rose Venus, like even in the pan you can see it looks like a straight up like coppery orange gold, but it has that very beautiful cool toned pink flip to it. So when you turn your head in a certain light, you will only see the pink flip, and then when the light hits you will see that like limeish green metallic overlay. Again, not an overly sparkly eyeshadows. Actually, out of the four that I have swatched here, only Gigabyte is really sparkly when you stand in artificial lighting. The others are more like straight up metallics with a very smooth formula to them, but because of the beautiful shifts that they have in them, they're still so interesting and so beautiful. Oh, just like staring at the swatches of these four eyeshadows, I'm like, can I put all of them on my lids right now? They're so pretty. Okay, and I have only two more eyeshadows to mention in this video. It might be that I forgot other eyeshadows from my collection that I like to use as one and dones, so it's possible that at some point we're going to do an updated version or a part 3 of this video. But right now I want to talk about the last two eyeshadows, which not surprisingly to anyone are going to be the two multi-chrome shades. So the first multi-chrome shade that I have loved using as a one and done, and you can absolutely tell from the little like dent that I have in the pan, is of course going to be VR Extraterrestrial from the Divine Rose 2 palette, the first multi-chrome shade that Pat ever released, and luckily for me, still in her baked formula. I think one of the reasons that I prefer this shade over the other multi-chrome I'm going to talk about really is the formula. It is there is something about the baked formula that is just smooth and light as air, and obviously this multi-chrome has been done and overdone. It's that like dark green forest base, like a smoky green base with a pink to copper like bronzy overlay. And I will try to like shift my hand here in the light. For those of you who have the palette, you know exactly all the shifts that this eyeshadow has. It is subtly sparkly, it has a beautiful texture to it, and if you ask me personally, I prefer to wear my multi-chrome shades as one and dones. I just feel like the intention with these eyeshadows is to wear them as one and dones because they already give you all these different shades. Why would you bother putting anything else when you have these? Now, I mentioned that I prefer this multi-chrome a little bit more over the one that was present in Huetopian Dream, which is the shade VR's Extreme here. VR's Extreme is unfortunately not in her baked formula. Now that is not to say that it still doesn't have a glorious formula to it. It is a very molten, smooth metallic eyeshadow, and it still works gorgeous as a one and done shade. And if anything, I prefer the shifts on this one a little bit more. You can see also that it spread out like butter. I love the shifts on this one more because the green is more of like that olivey forest green. The overlay is more of like a copper peach to red shift. So in terms of shifts, I like this one better. But in terms of how the formula feels and how it ends up looking on the eye, I slightly prefer the original VR's Extraterrestrial, but I really like VR's Extreme too. VR's Extreme is also a very complex shade. It looks glorious on the lids, and something that I really like to do actually with this shade is mix it in a little bit with an olive green eyeshadow, either with Gigabyte or with the olive from the Midnight Sun palette to intensify that green tone. They're just both really, really pretty and really magical, and obviously they make for fabulous one and done eyeshadows. If only I had more eyeballs so that I can put all of these on my eyes right now. I'm shifting my hand here in the light and I'm absolutely mesmerized. That is how easily distracted I am by pretty sparklies. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this video up. I think I have a pretty decent variety of one and done eyeshadows in my, repertoire, a bit more on the neutral side, a bit more on the colorful side, and I am actually quite curious to hear what your top 3 one and done eyeshadows are. So if you're up for it, make sure to let me know in the comments, because I'm just always very curious what works out for other people. Have you had any of the same tribulations that I have had when it comes to figuring out what kind of one and done eyeshadows work with my eye shape or with my eye color? As usual, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!